to make decisions on hundreds of issues, over some of which they don't have a deep knowledge. This leaves some legislators to rely heavily on lobbyists and members of the Washington establishment to educate and advise them. Name 2 sources you would turn to gain an in-depth knowledge on a legislative issue that you had not otherwise studied.
Well, I would absolutely agree, Rebecca, with your diagnosis of the fact that there are so many issues, and so it is difficult to get a handle on many of them. But I can tell you, having served in the legislature, there is a simple rule that you can live by, which is read the legislation you're voting on. And I am proud to have actually done that when I did in the Kansas House and when I served there. Again, never having missed a vote out of 1,585 votes. I think if you speak to people in the legislature from both parties, they would say that I was prepared, diligent, did my homework, and tried to make the best informed decision I could that would benefit my district and the constituents of the state of Kansas. And I'm glad that you mentioned the role of lobbyists. Because yes, lobbyists in our political culture right now are too easy to call and ask for views on issues, when in fact they're selling a point of view. And that's why I took such an important step to show my independence from the political system and the special interest to not take free personal meals, gifts, or trips from lobbyists. Because if you believe that the special interest don't have too much power, then you haven't spent enough time in our political system. As for 2 sources of where you actually get information on potential pieces of legislation, there are wonderful, nonpartisan, objective analyses of every piece of legislation and policy that you could imagine. And so I would go to those, to that source for objective analysis of the piece of legislation before me, and then I would actually talk to the people affected by that piece of legislation. Be it the workers, be it the CEOs, be it the entrepreneurs, whatever piece of legislation I'm dealing with, what I love to do when I'm in the legislature is to actually pick up the phone and talk to people and say, how does this actually affect your industry? We have a piece of legislation that affects car dealers, for example. I call Roger Schofield and I say, hey, how does this actually affect your business in Wichita? Is this something I should support? How should we tweak it? That's been my methodology in the Kansas House. It's one of hard work, doing my diligence, and trying to make the best decision I can for the voters and for the people of Kansas, and I will take that same rigorous approach to Congress.
The first place you turn when you're looking for the ability to solve the equation when you've got a complete complex legislation in front of you is, of course, to the folks who you represent, folks who are in this room tonight, folks who know how that piece of legislation is going to impact them deeply, personally, in ways that no one in Washington, D.C. could ever know. I'm glad to hear that Representative Goyle said he would go talk to nonpartisan think tanks. I hope he wouldn't include the think tank he used to work for, the Center for American Progress, as being a nonpartisan think tank. The second place you turn is that many of the pieces of legislation that you see put forward are not being put forward for the first time. Some of these battles have been fought, and it's important to go to legacy and look to history and tradition, the way folks have thought about these things before the issues that were raised, and make sure that you have a full scope, the full grasp of the piece of legislation that is there. Now, I've said throughout my campaign that the way I will become effective in Washington, D.C. is to go work hard to pick a handful of issues on which I'll become the subject matter expert. The place where folks in Washington, D.C. will in turn come to me and the team that I've built in Washington, D.C. to solve these very, very complex problems. And so I'll turn to the voters, the members here, the citizens of the 4th District of Kansas, and then to folks who've been down that road before. It's what you do in business as well. You reach out to folks who have crossed this same business challenge. You ask them how it went for them, how they resolved it, the issues that they thought about and the ones that they didn't, and you come to a good solution.
Well, as I said, I think that we have to seek the most nonpartisan information that's before us. And I'm glad that my opponent brought up think tanks because, of course, he sat as a trustee on a think tank here in Kansas that has called for some of the most radical policies that devastate public schools that this state has ever seen. And so I commend you to go to that website to see some of what happens when you sit in a room and you think about public policy but actually have lived implementing that public policy, you end up with ideas that simply won't work in the real world. And what I would say is, again, it is so vitally important that we return government back to the people and talk to our constituents to make sure that the laws that we are passing actually work in the real world and that are implemented in a way that helps Kansas and doesn't hurt that, and doesn't hurt Kansas. And that sounds simple, but I can tell you it's harder said than done, and I will tell you that I will take that same ethic that I had in the legislature and take that to Congress, because we need it.
Two quick thoughts. Representative Goyle talked about the importance of reading bills. The person that he would most likely vote for leadership, Speaker Pelosi, passed a health care law that she said, well, we will figure out. Thank you. She said, we'll figure out what's in it after that law has been passed. Let me tell you, we still can't figure out what's in it. And that's important because Representative Goyle spoke to a second point, which is to take a look at how laws impact lives. That health care law has already begun to cause the cost for health care to increase in the 4th District of Kansas. I run today, Century International increased. We have a new effective date of October 1st. I've seen it myself. We're living it. And so it is important that you look at how laws impact people and the citizens in the 4th District of Kansas. And we know what that health care law is going to do here in the 4th District.